Welcome to On Track. I'm Aisha Jaffer. In recent months, sweeping changes in immigration policy and increased enforcement have disrupted life across communities nationwide. From workspaces to schools, from local businesses to family homes, the effects of a more exclusionary approach to immigration are being felt in ways both visible and unseen. What does this mean for our community? How are our neighbors, coworkers, and friends navigating these uncertain times? Two guests are here today to help us answer these questions. Lisa DiGiaco-Crutcher is the CEO of Catholic Charities of Louisville. She's a sixth-generation Louisvillian, and she's active in civic and church initiatives like Leadership Louisville, Bingham Fellows, and Leadership Kentucky. Lisa holds a bachelor's from Furman University, a master's from St. Meinrad Seminary and School of Theology, and a Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And Christina Milkey is a career counselor for refugees and immigrants at Jewish Family and Career Services with over 15 years of serving those communities in the field. She earned her master's in social work from the University of Louisville's Kent School of Social Work and was part of the Bingham Fellows, focusing on strengthening the city's talent pipeline. Christina, thank you for being here with On Track.
Thank you so much.
I think before we start this conversation, it's important to define some terminology. How would you define the difference between immigrants and refugees? Lisa, starting with you.
Sure. Well, all refugees are immigrants, but not all immigrants are refugees is the easiest way to sum that up. When we're talking about the immigration system, there's a lot of terms that people are comfortable using in everyday language, which have very specific meaning within our immigration legal system. So when we're talking about a refugee in the context of immigration law, what we mean specifically is someone who's come through the United States Federal Refugee Program. It's a specific program. It's established under federal law. It involves the UN, State Department, and then Office of Refugee Resettlement agencies here within the United States that bring people from overseas who have been displaced in their home country, whether that's through civil war or some sort of disaster. But people who are currently displaced and unable to return home, and those folks who choose to be resettled in a third country can apply through the UN, eventually get selected by the United States for resettlement, and then they're brought here to the U.S. as part of a permanent resettlement process to make their homes here.
Christina, anything to add?
We do have some other populations that are also eligible under refugee resettlement laws. Cuban, Haitians, most of the parolees, Ukrainian, Afghans, and they receive the same benefits, or they have access to the same benefits as refugees, but they don't receive all of the benefits. They receive some or some access to them. The way that I usually describe it to people is that immigrants come here by choice. Refugees do not come here by choice. They are forced to move to a third country.
So, Christina, what populations does your organization serve, and which countries do they primarily come from? And does your work also extend to undocumented immigrants?
So our agency, JFCS, we have been doing work with immigrants and refugees since we were founded in 1908. One of our agency's pillars is immigrant and refugee services. We see everything. Any kind of immigrant that comes into our office is welcomed with open arms. We have all different kinds of services really that focus on post-resettlement, on making your life here and making it successful. At the moment, our agency sees most, and this is also the mosaic, the general makeup or the largest amounts of immigrants that we see are Cubans, because that is the majority of the population that we have in Louisville. But we also have a large population of Ukrainians that we serve, as well as many of the other resettled populations. We, JFCS, resettled in the late 1990s, early 2000s, many Russian and Ukrainian families fleeing the former Soviet Union. And so we still have very close ties within that community. And now that the war in Ukraine is happening, those ties have become stronger. But I have served people from over 80 countries at the last count that I did. As far as undocumented versus documented, we don't ask. So we believe that they are a person regardless of whatever documentation. Documentation is also very transitory. With some immigration statuses, you can have them and then by the stroke of a pen, tomorrow you don't. And so documentation isn't always a black and white. It's not always a black and white topic. It's very much, almost nobody has no documentation. Just, it depends on what kind of documentation people are talking about.
Right. Lisa, same question to you. Who does your organization serve, and how do you help these communities?
Sure. So one of the largest programs that we operate at Catholic Charities is refugee resettlement. In addition to the direct work of resettling refugees, we also house the Kentucky Office for Refugees, which in many states, that's a function of state government. Here in Kentucky and about 12 other states, it was devolved out to a nonprofit. So we actually work really closely with JFCS and other organizations in our community, such as Kentucky Refugee Ministries and International Rescue Coalition, that are working with refugee populations. So the largest piece of our work by far is in connection with refugee populations, as well as other entrances, as Christina mentioned, such as the Cuban population. The largest refugee resettlement population that we've seen here in the city in the last decade has definitely been the Congolese. We've resettled a lot of folks from Congo over the past 8 or so years, but that number really dwarfs by the number of Cubans who've come. And those Cubans have come on their own volition. So that's a lot of the work that we do. But Catholic Charities has a really broad portfolio of programs. So there's lots of other ways in which we interact with people in our community who are in need. For instance, we operate 2 food pantries. And so just as is the case at JFCS, I mean, we would never ask someone at the food pantry whether or not they're documented before we're going to help them with the food that their family needs. One of our food pantry locations is down on 4th Street near Central Avenue, down near Churchill Downs. There's a significant population of Hispanic families in that area. What their documentation status is, I certainly wouldn't be able to say.
What is it like right now to work in the field right now? What does it feel like? How has it been?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of anxiety. I think everyone's aware of that. You know, that there's a lot of anxiousness, certainly among staff, folks who are not sure what they may be asked to do, or, you know, who are worried about the presence of ICE in the community. And that's very much true for individuals and families as well. As Christina mentioned, documentation is fluid. And so it's very common for there to be families that are mixed status. Families perhaps where the children were born here in the U.S., the parents might have had temporary protected status, which is no longer valid, or they came on a visa and that visa has expired, or whatever the situation might be. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty for folks, and there's a lot of fear. But I hope that we're just going to continue to do the best that we can to provide services for the people who are here in our community and need our help.
Christina, same question to you. How has it been like to work in the field now?
These past few weeks have been really overwhelming, between the refugee stop work, the federal freeze of funds, the end of TPS for Venezuela, the end of the CHNV program. Work looks different now because instead of I specialize in workforce development, economic inclusion. Instead of helping people to better establish themselves here in Louisville and incorporate themselves into our economic infrastructure, now I'm having to have conversations with people about this is what is safe, this is what is not safe, this is what you should carry with you at all times, this is how to talk to ICE, a conversation which, in my opinion, I should not have to teach people how to teach their children how to answer to police when they're asking them for immigration documents. So the work looks different, but we are still very dedicated to helping this population. It's very important for the well-being of our city for us to have immigrants and refugees here. Absolutely. So it's very important that we let them know these are your rights and this is what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones. But we're still here. We're not giving up.
So, you know, things have changed so much, so vastly, as you've both touched on. But with the Trump administration's return and its promised changes to immigration policy, did you take any anticipatory steps to prepare for these potential shifts?
We did a preemptive Know Your Rights. We have community chats, which we specifically detail different programs within our agency, and we did one the day after the inauguration on Know Your Rights preemptively. We were assuming that President Trump was going to make some announcements specifically about immigration. We were not expecting the number, but we were expecting something. And so our agency is going through the steps of making sure that we're posting private property, that we have an ICE policy, what to do when ICE comes knocking at the door. We've taught our staff how to deal with ICE if they come into the building, and also how to assuage the fears of a lot of our immigrant clients. And so our agency, yes, did some things beforehand, but we never could have expected everything that came down.
Lisa, how about you? Were there any preparations for the
We
incoming?
certainly had a lot of conversations and tried to do some forward planning within our organization. And not only do we serve a lot of immigrants, we also have a lot of folks on our staff whose background is international. And so we knew that everyone had concerns, and we wanted people to feel comfortable that we were taking care of everything that we can do. But I also felt like it was really important that we not create fear and anxiety. I think it's only natural that people are concerned. And certainly we have seen some reasons for people's concerns to be validated. But at least so far, fortunately, we haven't seen some of the sort of worst case scenarios that people are afraid may come to pass. We haven't seen major raids at local employers and kids not able to, have parents at home when they get off the school bus, or, ICE raids at churches or things like that. So although I very much want to respect people's fears as valid, I also think it's really important to recognize where we actually are and respond appropriately in proportion to what's actually happening, as opposed to what people fear is happening, because it's a really hard time, and we don't need to borrow trouble. We don't need to create reasons for people to be anxious. And so, trying to just, as in any other circumstance, plan for what you can control, be as prepared as you can be for situations that may develop, but without inciting anxiety.
Right. Well, we'll be back in a minute. You're listening to On Track.
Open source AI is available to all, not just the few. Meta's open source is free to use, enabling startups like Zaron to innovate. Here's CEO and co-founder Dr. Cal Clark.
We've built a tool with Llama, Meta's open source AI model, to help radiologists double-check their diagnoses. We're able to collaborate with universities to further radiology education and catch more errors.
Learn how others are building with Meta's free open source AI at ai.meta.com/open.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Sign up for Greenlight today at greenlight.com/podcast.
You're on track, and we're talking about immigration policy and its effect on our community with Lisa DeJacco-Crutcher, CEO of Catholic Charities of Louisville, and Christina Milkey, a career counselor for refugees and immigrants at Jewish Family and Career Services. Christina, I want to talk about, since President Donald Trump returned to office, there have been significant changes to immigration policy, and we've sort of touched on this. The U.S. Department of State ordered the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants to halt all refugee settlement work, suspending admissions, assistance, and federal funding. With these changes, including a broader crackdown on immigration, you've sort of touched on this, but how have you sort of pivoted how you operate? I know it's less about kind of the economics and now more about safety. Is there more beyond that?
So anytime that federal funding is at risk, we currently receive 3 federal funded through ORR grants, we have to do some alternative planning and think about what could happen if this funding completely goes away. We are also pivoting to focus a lot more services on individuals that are already here because we will not be receiving new arrivals, it looks like, for the next year at least. We don't know. So doing a lot more work, holistic work around the entire life of the client, because we don't know what other services in the community might be affected by all of these executive actions, all of these new laws that are being put into place. But I think that the biggest shift has definitely been more talking to people about their rights, at least in some of the populations that I've seen that we work with. Many of them are not aware that their immigration status is fluid. They believed that they entered with a status and that status was golden. It was forever. And so having to break the news to them that it's possible that your status might be sundowned and you might have to find another way to be able to stay or risk deportation, those are really difficult conversations to have with people. So I think that pivoting to safety, but very similar to what Lisa said, making sure that we're not scaring people. People should still go to work. Kids need to go to school. People should still feel comfortable accessing services within the Louisville community. Louisville is a welcoming city. We were the second city certified welcoming in the United States after Dayton, Ohio, which is my hometown. But nothing has changed in how we serve the immigrant and refugee population. It's just the stakes are a little bit higher now.
Lisa, has anything changed for you?
Yeah, so I think Christina's exactly right that the work has to go on. So although we're not able to do the work that we typically are doing for new arrivals, there remains a lot of work that is ongoing work for refugees who've arrived. So when refugees arrive, the first 90 days that they arrive, they receive really concentrated services to really get their feet under them and help them to start to acclimate to the community around them. But even after that 90 days is up, refugees are entitled to 2 to 5 years of additional services, depends on family circumstance and some other factors, in which we're really focusing on employment, the work that Christina does, employment placements, education, youth mentoring, right? So, if you're a 15-year-old who came here as a refugee, your parents are even less helpful than most people's parents when it comes to trying to figure out, what your life plan is going to look like. And should you go to college? Should you go to trade school? How do you pay for these things? What other options are open to you? So all of that work is ongoing, right? And I think that's really important for people to know and understand. Kentucky resettled 1,600 refugees in the last federal fiscal year that ended September 30 of 2024. Those 1,600 folks are here, and they are here in our community. The numbers in the years before that were a little smaller, but still pretty significant. Kentucky has an amazing success story to tell when it comes to refugee resettlement. We're one of the largest refugee resettlement states in the country, and it's because we're really good at it. So we're still here doing that work. Our partners like JFCS and KRM are still here doing that work to help those folks get acclimated and assimilated into our community, which has worked so beautifully for the last 50 years. I mean, Christina's exactly right. This is a really welcoming city. Whether it was the Vietnamese in the late 70s and early 80s, or the Bosnians in the early 1990s, or the Sudanese and Somali around the turn of the 2000s, or the Congolese more recently, or the Cubans really throughout that entire time period. Louisville has done a wonderful job of making itself home for so many different people from so many different places around the world. And we're all still here to do that work. And so these folks who are here, who have come already, even as recently as January 20th, right? And we had people who were here who were coming to make Louisville their home. And so we're going to keep being here, doing the work to support those people. And hopefully the community's coming right along with us.
Well, I'd like to ask you both this. What might our listeners not know about the immigrants and refugees community here and across Kentucky?
Well, I think one really thing that people frequently don't know is what a success story Louisville is in this regard. In the state of Kentucky generally, there's a big refugee resettlement population in Bowling Green as well, which a lot of people don't know that. But just to recognize, what this incredible depth and breadth of resettlement has meant for our community over the years. It really is a wonderful part of the tapestry here in our city. Another thing a lot of people don't realize is how significant our Cuban population is. In the past, let's say 4 to 5 years, there's probably been 50,000 Cubans come to Louisville. And that is jaw-dropping. We probably had...
On top of the already 20,000 that we had living here previously.
Right. It's one of the largest Cuban communities in the country outside of South Florida. And I think people don't necessarily recognize until you point out to them that not every mid-sized city has a great Cuban restaurant on every single neighborhood.
True. I think that maybe one of the things that a lot of people would not know is that many of our immigrants and refugees coming here are very well educated and very highly skilled. Louisville, probably within at least the last 10 years, has easily received at least 7,000 doctors. So those are people who were certified as practitioners in their home countries and come here and usually drive your Uber, or they clean up at the hospital, or they serve your food at your kids' schools. But I've served people who were the minister of education in their home country, who were the vice president of a country, very important, very educated, very skilled individuals. And they are all looking for work. They are all here to work. Everybody is desperate.
Let me add one more thing that I
Sure.
think people often don't recognize, and that's how significant this is for the labor force here in our community. So I talked about all those Cubans who've come. The average age of Cubans who've come to Louisville in the last 4 years is 32. Okay, these are young adults who are here to work and build a life and build a family, right? And Kentucky is a graying state. So adding all of these young, strong, healthy, excited to work folks to our community is a really, really good thing for Kentucky.
Well, what advice would you give those in our audience who are listening who have family members or friends affected by these immigration policy changes? How can they offer support during such an uncertain time?
Definitely get to know your rights. Make a safety plan with your family and your loved ones. Make sure that you have thought of multiple contingencies. I know that with my clients, we don't just have a person that you would call if ICE were to pick you up. We have a second person that you would call, and they have a person that they would call. And so making sure that, if at all possible, making sure that they have the right documentation, they know what documentation they need to have on them at all times, but also what to say if ICE approaches them. We've heard from, there are several practices that people can do to stay safe. Many of our lawyers are saying, if you have a green card or less, you should not be leaving the country right now. You shouldn't leave the country probably within the next 3 years. And so making sure that people understand how to keep themselves, their families, and their loved ones all safe, but also asking individuals how they can help. Don't assume that you know what situation someone is going through. Ask them if they're needing help, and then be that support that person, accompany them through whatever it is that they're going through.
That was such a great answer. I'd like to answer a slightly different question, which is what people can do who maybe don't have immigrants in their immediate circle and who are wondering how can they show their support or be of assistance at this time. And I would say, first of all, recognizing that people do need accompaniment, right? And so whether it's with a church or a religious group or some other community group, if somebody wants to volunteer their time and their physical presence to show up and support people, I think that's a wonderful thing to do. But another thing really is just to learn and educate ourselves more about the circumstances. Immigration is incredibly complicated. There are very few people who can explain it with any degree of certainty. But what we mostly know is that we don't know a whole lot. And back in the first Trump administration, Catholic Charities, we had a presentation that we did a number of different times in different places. We did a roundtable down at the main library with Congressman Yarmouth and some other different times. But we really just tried to talk about the basics of immigration law so that people could understand a little bit better what the context was for a lot of these things. The U.S. immigration law has not been updated since 1965. it's been 60 years. The economy, the culture, there's a lot of change in 60 years. And the law is not responsive to the people who are here or the needs of the native-born people who need help and support, and where immigrants really make a difference. So I would say seeking out those opportunities for people to learn more and to understand the issue better is incredibly important.
Well, Lisa, Christina, I really appreciate your time being here. Thank you so much for being here on Track and talking about this.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate the chance.
Thank you so much.
Lisa DiGiaco-Crutcher is the CEO of Catholic Charities of Louisville, and Christina Milkey is a career counselor for refugees and immigrants at Jewish Family and Career Services. On Track is a production of Louisville Public Media. The On Track production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Jacob Munoz, Alex Biscardi, and Laura Ellis. If you're just tuning in and you want to hear the full show, you can find it now at LouisvilleOnTrack.org or in your favorite podcast app. And let's continue the conversation. Is there something you want to hear about, something that matters to your Kentuckiana experience? Let us know by sending a text or giving us a call at 502-814-TALK or send an email to ontrack@lpm.org. I'm Aisha Jaffer, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Until next time, you're on Track with Louisville Public Media.
Did you know 39% of teen drivers admit to texting while driving? Even scarier, those who text are more likely to speed and run red lights. Shockingly, 94% know it's dangerous but do it anyway. As a parent, you can't always be in the car, but you can stay connected to their safety with Greenlight Infinity's driving reports. Monitor their driving habits, see if they're using their phone, speeding, and more. These reports provide real data for meaningful conversations about safety. Plus, with weekly updates, you can track their progress over time. Help keep your teens safe. Sign up for Greenlight Infinity at greenlight.com/podcast.
February 20th marks 75 years of public radio in Louisville. We're kicking off the anniversary year by celebrating on the radio and online. Listen on Thursday, February 20th for your chance to join in the celebration. Visit lpm.org/75 to learn more and participate.